This is the process shot. I'm Michael, I'm stuck in a linear timeline, and I've seen The Atom Project, a new science fiction action movie from Shawn Levy. It follows Adam, a 12-year-old boy with a chip on his shoulder in the current year, and Adam, the same boy from the year 2050, now a fugitive time-traveling pilot who has crash-landed in the past in an effort to uncover the truth about the disappearance of his wife. Wounded, the future Adam has to not only wait for his damaged ship to repair itself, but he must also contend with not only forces chasing him from his time, but his past self, whose personality he had assumed that he had left behind long ago. Over time, as the two Adams work through their differences, they've come to find that they may very well be the key to saving both of their futures. The story and plot here is actually treated in a relatively interesting manner, balancing the actual combat and suspense of the future Adam and his enemies with a somewhat meaningful character story that explores how the acts and actions of his past have affected the future and his personality. The first half of the film focuses more on that aspect, giving up the reveal of the two Adams almost immediately, and going more into the deeper character conflict. Though once the action does start ramping up, the character exploration goes a bit more into the background. Things are wrapped up relatively well by the end, but only in a way that makes it clear you're meant to recognize a change, sort of like a bookend, and not quite as something that feels as naturally earned as it's meant to be. Maybe it's just down to how this movie has 4 writers and some wires got crossed. At the very least, the character chemistry does work out, with Ryan Reynolds as the adult Adam and Walker Scobell as his younger self. They don't always manage to feel like a single person, so to speak, with some initial setup, mostly through dialogue, which gradually becomes more and more different over time, and individually they manage to hold up their roles pretty well. Though because of the dialogue, the younger Adam takes some getting used to. Reynolds, in particular, is able to get across the kind of snark that's expected from him without being too overbearing about it, with a few good turns and more dramatic moments that shows a range that ought to be exploited more often. As for the rest of the movie's production, it's relatively mixed. There's a heavy focus on special effects in The Atom Project, which brings with it futuristic art design and technology, but never builds on it much more beyond that. It's mostly just to differentiate the good guys and bad guys, I guess. Cinematography is pretty much just serviceable, in that we get a pretty standard pattern starting with wide establishing shots, before closing in on the action on screen, and then just sticking to simple shots and angles from there. If there are any creative choices made in frame composition, it's usually done once or twice and then never really used again. Editing is also pretty standard, though I did notice a few points where shots and conversations would hop back and forth between characters at a rather faster pace than the actual discussion seems to call for. Another odd creative choice is in the soundtrack, which is either a rather generic orchestral score or a few licensed tunes that feel out of place, at least for a movie set in modern times where more recent songs could have likely fit whatever tone they were going for. It doesn't hurt the overall film, but it doesn't really help it either. On the bright side, though, it does at least cement it within a range of, well, I suppose the best word would be decent. Across the board, this is hardly a great movie at all, But the story and overall production gives it some sense that it's trying to be worthwhile, and not just a forgettable action movie that wastes its potential. The Atom Project, Shawn Levy, 2022. 3 stars. If you're in the mood for something loud but light, I'd recommend giving it a try. That's it for this review. If you liked it, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel for more reviews. If I knew I was going to be trapped in a theater for almost a year now, I probably would have watched more movies as a kid. Then I could talk about these and look like I know what I'm rambling about.